That's what she.
This is Elizabeth, Taylor, Casey, Kelsey.
Hi, my name is Sarah Pradema and I'm doing the informative speech over the Titanic. The Titanic, also known as the Unsinkable and the Ship of Dreams, went on its first voyage on April 10, 1912, and sadly its last. The Titanic was one of the biggest ships of its time back in 1912. The credibility that it had even before it set sail was enormous. It is important to fix our mistakes so that something this tragic does not happen again in history. I will inform you about the structure of the Titanic, what happened and why it sunk, and when and how the wreck was discovered. According to the White Star Line, the Titanic would survive for many years. Finding the ship many years later and having those survivors tell their stories touched many people's hearts, including those who had family that were lost in the nightmare of the Ship of Dreams. Even after never being tested out, only by the mathematical and scientific results behind it, it was known as the ship that would never sink. The RMS Titanic was designed by the White Star Line Company back in 1907. It was the turn of the century and luxury was the new it factor. Safety, style, feel, and money were the key ideas into building this one-of-a-kind item. The managing director, Joseph Ismay, wanted to make the biggest and most luxurious ship in the world, thus the Titanic. White Star Line, an American company, decided to build the Sisters of the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. The construction of the Titanic started on March 31st, 1909. The Titanic was one of the most well-appointed and yet dangerous boats there was. It took 3 years to finish building the large passenger ship in the world. Within those 3 years, lives were lost. About 10 were lost and hundreds were injured. The Titanic had electric lights, heaters, and even elevators. Safety was the #1 priority while building the Titanic. She had a double steel hull and 16 watertight compartments. At the hull of the ship, with the doors would automatically close if the water came into them so that the ship would stay afloat. This was designed to provide the utmost in security for the people that were boarding the ship. This was done so that it can stand up to anything that the ocean would have to throw at it, or so we thought. One major flaw was that because everyone thought that the Titanic was unsinkable, they only carried about 16 lifeboats instead of the full 64 that she should have had. 4 days after departure, the passengers on the Ship of Dreams would experience the biggest nightmare of all. On the night of Sunday, April 14, 1912, the Titanic crashed into an iceberg that was found to be in the way of the ship. While the protective layers thought to be enough on the boat, they continued to sail on. People were warning the captain of the Titanic, but he had too much faith in Old Reliable. The iceberg broke through the protective barriers and started flooding from the bottom up. With hundreds of thousands of gallons spewing into the Titanic, there was no turning back now. In many pictures, icebergs are much bigger than they appear to be. Under the surface lied a killer problem. The iceberg had sharp and jagged edges that just sliced into the boat without a problem. More than 1,000 people lost their lives due to this mistake of the judgment of the captain. It took about 3 to 4 hours for the Titanic to be fully submerged into the Atlantic's ocean abyss. Due to the pressure exerted from the water flooding above half the boat, the other side of the boat was lifted up with the force of the ocean and snapped in half. More than 1,500 people died that night, mostly due to hypothermia and drowning. About 3 to 4 hours later, another boat came to the rescue. The first to arrive was Carpathia, the sister ship. In the 4 hours, all the passengers in the lifeboats had boarded it and it was headed to New York. A total of 705 people were rescued, while 1,517 perished. There was nothing left to the Titanic except for the horror and the sorrow on the people's faces. The tragic accident that left thousands of people without family members had a toll on what the 20th century had in store for them. For 70 years, the Titanic sat at the bottom of the Atlantic untouched but strongly remembered, with many people's fine china, diamond, pearls, gold, and silver. The Titanic sank about 13,000 feet to the bottom of the Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland, according to Robert Ballard. In 1987, Robert Ballard used a submarine with a deep-sea camera and finally found the Titanic. This was a major and life-changing find for the world. This was going to solve a 70-year mystery. After the Titanic was found, the survivors came out and started telling their stories. Some even reclaimed their belongings that were lost in the wreckage. It took many tries to locate the Titanic. Most divers came off a bit short, but finally, after finding bits and pieces, they located the ship, and the rest is history. The unsinkable ship journeyed out for its first and last cruise. Many people are marked with the scars of that night. There was a quote by the captain of the Carpath the night of the Titanic. Icebergs loomed up and fell astern, and we never slackened. It was an anxious time with the Titanic's fateful experience very close to our minds. It depended on the turn of the wheel. All right.
Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.